All right, so the online should be starting now. Shall we? Yes, Vinicius, please come over. Olá, pessoal, bom dia a todos. Começando em português para informar que o nosso evento hoje ele vai ser em inglês, então já vou fazer a troca do idioma para a gente começar, tá bem? So, good morning everyone and welcome. It's a pleasure to have you all here today for discussing pluralism today, debating cosmopolitanism, state sovereignty and international law and politics, which is also the name of the just released book of Jorge Emilio Núñez, one of our very special guests who's here with us today. But before presenting our guests, let me just guide you through how this is going to go. We're going to have 2 rounds of debate here in the panel and as well as with the public. So you also get the opportunity to make questions, either if you're at home watching us from YouTube or if you're here in person, we're going to pass the mic, okay? All right, so without further ado, here to my left, I have Jorge Emilio Núñez. Jorge is Argentinian. He holds a PhD from the University of Manchester and has several publications in the area of international relations and politics. Please be welcomed. It's a pleasure to have you here. We also have with us Richard Mackenzie Gray Scott. He's a postdoctoral fellow at the Bonavero Institute of Human Rights and St. Anthony's College, University of Oxford. Welcome, Richard. Thank you. And here to my right, we also have Vinicius Souza from the Angelica Goulart Foundation, right? He's going to be talking to us a little bit about the foundation and presenting some of his work. Welcome. All right, so I might pass the floor to Núñez. Núñez, welcome again. Please, the floor is yours. Jorge. Yes.
Hello? Yeah, it's working. Obrigado, Brasil. Obrigado, Julia, por la presentación. Obrigado, Fernando y Jasmine, amigos de acá de la Fundación Getulio Vargas. Y obrigado, la Fundación Getulio Vargas. La charla, voy a hablar en inglés, pero la charla es global. Se transmite vía streaming por YouTube. I'm going to thank you, Brazil. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Fernando and Leal, friends from Fundação Getulio Vargas, for the invitation. Each of these books takes 3 years to, from contract to publishing. So thank you very much for making the effort to make this possible. Thank you, Richard, for taking the time to read the book. And in particular, obrigado, Laura, my friend, for being here. And gracias, papá, por haber viajado. My chat, although Julia was explaining the whole schedule, my chat will be subdivided into 2 parts. Although I'm going to be talking about pluralism and my latest book, I don't believe in words, I believe in actions. And my kind of actions have to do in Brazil and for Latin America with a charity, a foundation I'm very proud of to be part. It's called Fundação Angelica Goulart, ex for people who are Latin American, ex Fundação Xuxa Meneghel. And here I'm going to present the current president. He's been president for 5 years now, Vinicius Santos, my friend, mi amigo in Brazil, my family in Brazil, and I mean that. He's the president, he's been president for 5 years, and without further ado, he will explain a bit in Portuguese, and I will do the translation in English for the global public, simply because people assume when Xuxa left in 2017, the foundation shut the doors. No, the foundation still live, the foundation still working for children and teens in Brazil, in Pedro de Guaratiba, and I'm very proud. Vinicius, bem-vindo.
Bom dia a todos, né? Meu nome é Vinícius, como foi apresentado. Quero agradecer a oportunidade de estar aqui. ao professor Jorge, como disse, né, o nosso amigo, querido, bem presente no nosso trabalho da Fundação. Agradecer a casa aqui, a Fundação Getulio Vargas, que assim, né, contribuiu para a minha formação acadêmica. Aqui eu pude me especializar dentro da área do terceiro setor, e isso foi muito importante. Eu vejo que assim, né, trazer uma instituição do terceiro setor para uma fala de assim, né, introdução para esse debate, traz uma reflexão muito grande para a gente olhar para o pluralismo de um outro ponto de vista, né? Trazer a questão da diversidade, da igualdade, da gente poder viver numa cultura mais universal, trazer assim, o direito e o valor do respeito, né? Para a sociedade como um todo, para todas as classes. Então, eu quero trazer essa fala aqui, né, de introdução, que eu acho que é uma reflexão muito grande para tudo que a gente vai conversar nesse momento do debate que nós temos. E, a partir daí, eu vou falar um pouco da Fundação, um pouco do trabalho da Fundação, e a gente poder levar adiante essa questão do pluralismo em todas as vias de trabalho e vida nossa, né, profissional, comunitária, nesse sentido. A Fundação, esse ano, completou 34 anos. Ela, em 1989, a Xuxa Meneghel, junto com a Angelica Goulart, que é uma assistente social, né, fundou uma instituição lá em Pedra de Guaratiba, zona oeste do Rio de Janeiro, um lugar que está entre os menores índices de desenvolvimento humano dentro aqui do Rio de Janeiro. No ano passado, a prefeitura divulgou um índice de progressão social e, dentre os 158 bairros que nós temos no Rio de Janeiro, Pedra de Guaratiba está na colocação 150, ou seja, estamos entre os 10 piores bairros em oportunidade ou qualidade de vida, né, para a comunidade. Também temos um dado bem relevante de que, nos últimos anos, a favela que mais cresceu no estado de Rio de Janeiro, ela está situada no bairro de Pedra de Guaratiba, ou seja, né, as demandas, a pobreza, a violência, a falta de oportunidades, ela só cresce. E quando a Xuxa escolheu esse lugar lá em Pedra de Guaratiba, ela pôde conhecer muito dessa realidade, e eu tenho certeza que isso transformou ela numa pessoa ainda melhor e bem mais humana em relação ao olhar dela para a vida e para as pessoas. E na parceria com a Angelica Goulart, que é uma assistente social, que assim, né, auxiliou a Xuxa a desenvolver esse trabalho. Ambas estiveram à frente desse trabalho por mais de 25 anos. E nós vivemos uma transição agora em 2018, onde a Xuxa permitiu que jovens ex-alunos da Fundação pudessem assumir o trabalho, um trabalho tão importante, né? Tem uma apresentação que a gente pode colocar para vocês verem um pouco, né, das imagens da Fundação, né? A gente, como eu falei, né, a gente está situado nessa região geográfica da cidade, mas somos um lugar lindo, maravilhoso, de natureza, de muito amor. São quase 20 mil metros quadrados, são 5 imóveis dentro da Fundação, 2 desses, né, são 2 prédios lá dentro. A gente já atendeu mais de 200 mil pessoas em todos os projetos que a gente atende. Nesses anos que a gente teve a Xuxa e a Angélica à frente do trabalho, foi um trabalho muito potente a nível nacional e mundial, né? A Xuxa, ela foi protagonista e é protagonista de muitas campanhas de direitos de criança e adolescente, de violência, de combate contra a violência sexual, e isso trouxe uma notoriedade para a Fundação. Nós conseguimos inúmeros prêmios e reconhecimentos em relação a isso, né? Assim, nós fomos secretaria executiva de várias redes nacionais e internacionais, com uma instituição lá em Pedra de Guaratiba, né, dentro desse cenário todo que eu disse para vocês, demonstrando que assim, a potência do trabalho ela está em todos os lugares, né? Basta a gente dar oportunidade, a gente reconhecer isso. E nessa transição que nós vivemos, o Jorge chegou com a gente lá exatamente no ano que a gente estava vivendo tudo isso. Foi e é um grande parceiro. E a Fundação seguiu adiante com jovens que foram formados nos projetos da Fundação, né? Eu cheguei lá com 18 anos, estou lá há mais de 20 anos, hoje estou na presidência da Fundação e toda a equipe de gestão da Fundação é de ex-alunos formados pela Xuxa, pela Angelica e pelos projetos que a Fundação proporcionou e proporciona para todos nós. Quando...
Diz os nomes: Elaine, Bárbara, Freddy,
Milton, a Bárbara, o Alfredo, né, o Milton, a
Simone,
Paula,
na cozinha.
A Simone. São pessoas que estão lá há mais de 25 anos, algumas desde 1989, estão lá há 34 anos, e é um lugar que assim, traz para a gente a notoriedade, a importância, a relevância do trabalho social, seja ele qual for, né, no Brasil, fora do Brasil, com a oportunidade da gente vivenciar diversas comunidades, demandas dentro desse trabalho, né? É um lugar muito plural, de diversidade, que busca trazer instrumentos, oportunidades, formação, qualificação, entrada no mercado de trabalho, para que a gente viva, de fato, a essência desse pluralismo, né? É muito difícil a gente ver uma sociedade, uma comunidade plural, quando você está num contexto muito desigual. Então, assim, os projetos da Fundação, para vocês terem, né, para vocês conhecerem um pouco mais a Fundação, a gente trabalha com 3 ciclos: infância e adolescência, onde os projetos são mais voltados para os casos de violência doméstica, né, e para o...
Really sorry to interrupt. It's just that Jorge might want to make some translation for the people at home.
Perfecto. Well, I'm going to translate this part in English, so bear with me, Brazilian colleagues, for the global audience. Thank you very much. Obrigado, Vinicius. Vinicius was explaining, first of all, his gratitude for the organizers, for Fundação Getulio Vargas, for Rich, and for myself for being here. Second, this first part of his presentation, he's talking about the history behind Fundação Angelica Goulart. Fundação Angelica Goulart was founded in 1989 by 2 friends, Xuxa and Meneghel. For those who are Latin American, they know Xuxa. She's been working for children and teens for more than 40 years. And her friend, social worker, Angelica Goulart. That was the first part. They had Brazilian presence, so all over Brazil. And he was explaining as well why the Fundação in that particular... by the way, we don't use the word charity. In Latin America, we prefer the word Fundação. There has an issue with levels. That's why we use that expression, not charity. And again, why that place? Right now, out of 158 communities in Rio de Janeiro, they are classed as 150 in level of poverty. It's one of the most deprived areas in the whole of Rio de Janeiro, one of the most dense populated places in the whole of Brazil. So they have quite a few issues involving teens, involving children, and involving women in particular. Another thing he was telling us, throughout these 34 years, they've been able to attend more than 200,000 people in total. Why I'm talking about 34 years? Because in 2017, for different reasons, Xuxa had to leave Fundação Angelica Goulart. That's when legally they changed from Fundação Xuxa Meneghel to Fundação Angelica Goulart. One thing I have to say, the Fundação still lives, the Fundação still opens, and the Fundação still needs help from people more than ever. Because before we used to have someone like Xuxa, globally well known, and right now we don't have her, and we don't have the resources we could afford with her, and that's why we don't have as many projects right now. That's when I joined the Fundação 2018, and when I met Vinicius. So I'm going to mention briefly the names. We right now have more than 20 people as staff, but at the time when I first came to Fundação Angelica Goulart, there were only 5-6 people. It was a bit sad when Xuxa left, because we didn't know if the Fundação could carry on. And it was Vinicius, Freddy, Barbara, Vinicius' wife, Eleni, Milton, and one of my favorite people, cook Simone. She cooks for all children and teens. Why I'm saying this? Because they were not children at that time. And right now, thanks to Vinicius and the team, they are still alive and still working. Again, he will talk about now. This is the past, so I don't want to explain too much about the past. We need people now, and the now has to do with what he calls three pillars, and he will refer now to children, teens, and women in a situation of vulnerability. So Vinicius, now you.
Bom, né, vocês viram por que a gente chama o Jorge de amigo, né? Ele não estudou isso de ontem para hoje, ele vive, né, a Fundação conosco, e tem nele assim, a essência do nosso trabalho e todo esse potencial para poder fazer e falar assim, sobre nós. Como eu disse, assim, né, a gente viveu um ciclo onde, com a Xuxa e com a Angélica, possibilitou que a Fundação trabalhasse, né, para essa garantia de direitos, né, das famílias, né, de crianças e adolescentes e de todo o núcleo familiar, numa proporção, numa escala mundial, né, com resultados expressivos para a gente, por exemplo, com a Xuxa e a Angélica em Brasília, aprovando leis, né, que hoje em dia né, garante vida, né, vamos dizer assim, né, para as nossas crianças, adolescentes e suas famílias. E quando a gente assume o trabalho, né, jovens da comunidade assumindo um trabalho tão grande, tão importante como esse, a gente se volta para o trabalho comunitário, né, de quando a Fundação iniciou o seu trabalho, e hoje em dia a gente atende a 300 famílias todos os dias na Fundação, um trabalho que foi direcionado muito pela pandemia agora. Nós chegamos a atender mais de 2.000 famílias durante a pandemia, não só com doação de alimentos, mas com cursos de formação e outras coisas, e selecionamos 300 dessas famílias para participar dos projetos institucionais, né? Então, a Fundação hoje atende a todo o núcleo familiar. A gente tem projetos para criança, adolescente, para os jovens e para as mulheres, né? A gente tem um estudo onde mais de 70% das famílias são chefiadas só por mulheres, né? São famílias monoparentais, e essas mulheres precisam de formação, qualificação profissional para poder se emancipar e poder viver uma vida digna. E a Fundação está lá, trabalhando, lutando, né, para sobreviver e dar conta de poder apoiar essas famílias e trazer uma oportunidade de uma vida igual e ter essa diversidade e esse pluralismo. Queria agradecer a todos, né, pela oportunidade de trazer aqui um pouco do trabalho da Fundação, e espero que essa reflexão entre a garantia de direitos, né, pensar nisso, né, numa vida mais igual para as pessoas, o quanto que isso impacta em a gente poder ter uma vida plural, né? Muito obrigado a todos pela oportunidade, né?
Obrigada a você, Vinícius. Agora eu vou passar pass the floor again to Jorge, so he can make his last translations for us.
Perfect. Thank you. Obrigado, Vinicius. It's a pleasure. The three pillars right now, and we can talk forever. That's why, you know, this is pluralism, and this is pluralism in action. I don't believe in theory. And that's why Vinicius was talking about the three main pillars. Again, we can talk about many projects, many examples, and each project depends on funding. Let's be clear about it. We have children in particular, teenagers, and women in position of vulnerability. Usually, what Vinicius was explaining, right now they have more than 300 families, monoparental families, which means usually the lady in charge of the house, because for whatever reason the husband has left quite a while ago, either because of domestic violence or not. At the time, the pandemic, and I have to say this because I witnessed that, people like Vinicius, at the time of the pandemic, when the government did not match the Brazilian government at the time, people like Vinicius were driving a truck helping more than 3,000 families around Pedra de Guarachiva. When I'm going to expand a bit here, because to me this is important. When on the news we tended to see at the time in America or the UK, people should wash their hands with water and soap, and these people didn't have access to soap. Xuxa actually gave 2,000 or something like that baskets with basics, and people like Vinicius were driving vans providing food, because the other issue, people were told not to work, you know, to avoid contracting COVID. But these people, if they didn't work, monoparental families, they couldn't feed their children. By the way, this speech is not in favor or against Lula or Bolsonaro. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to explain fact. Yeah, we need help. We don't do politics here. I wanted to say that because I'm Latin American and I know how precious are politics in Latin America. We don't use politics. We are asking for help. So again, people like him. Why I'm talking about Vinicius, and I can talk about Eleni, Barbara, Milton, Simone, because Vinicius and the rest were part of projects when they were children. Vinicius started in the foundation. He was 6 years old when he started being part of the foundation. And when Xuxa left, she was very clever and very wise. He left these people in charge, people coming from Pedra de Guarachiva. That's why the foundation is still alive, because they are part of the community. And that should be replicated in countries like the UK or America or so on. Because she, and in particular Angelica Goulart, were very keen on preparing them for their future. Again, we can talk about many projects. I'm going to simply put the slides, and we are happy to send this information across, because there are many projects. And right now, although it's fashionable to talk about sustainability, they have many projects relating to sustainability. One of them, they work with a school next to Fundação Angelica Goulart. They donated the land where the school is functioning now, and with 50 tons of food, they are able to provide 15 tons of compost. They do that as Fundação Angelica Goulart, and they are one of the many things they teach people to do as working opportunities. Again, that's very briefly pluralism in action. If you want more, include the Jovens Teens Club and many more. If you want to know more about Fundação Angelica Goulart, if you want to get involved, don't wait for someone coming from the UK to do it. We are Latin America, not only Brazil. I'm from Argentina, and people ask me, why Fundação Angelica Goulart? One of the reasons, first, because of Xuxa. I know how much effort she put. Second, I'm Latin American first, and then Brazilian. And third, it's a completely transparent organization, and I'm happy to put my name down, because I did not put my name for some other organization, including Yale. So one of the things that attract me about this foundation, they are transparent, and if any questions, all our numbers are online. Every single real, every single American dollar, every single British pound, they go to children, they go to teens, they go to women that need help. So thank you, Vinicius, and all the team, Elaine, Bárbara, Milton, Freddy, Simone, Ana, Victoria, todo el team, por el esfuerzo, for all the effort you make. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jorge. Thanks, Vinicius, again. It's a real pleasure to get to know better the Angelica Goulart Foundation. Now we're going to start our first round of comments and questions regarding the book. I got the chance to read it. Thank you for letting us have a copy in advance, as well as Richard. We discussed it. So now I'm going to pass the floor again to you, back to you, so you can make your first remarks and introductions, and we may start the debate properly.
Perfect. Can we change PowerPoint? Perfect. I'm going to start explaining to people. It usually takes me 40-50 minutes, so I'm going to talk about only the hallmarks, the main points, because then we have Richard. Thank you again for having the patience to read the book, and Julia. So the point I'm going to make are simply the key ones. By the way, you see the logo from Fundação Angelica Goulart. I present this logo in the UK, in America, in Indonesia, because I'm very proud of this team. My contact details are there, and again, if you can contact Julia if you need any further assistance. My presentation tends to have 3 blocks. Why I'm doing this? Why I'm writing about sovereignty and cosmopolitanism? What is the current situation in law? And my take on, what can we do to improve? I think why sovereignty and cosmopolitanism, the COVID, we don't need any more proof. We have right now in Brazil and around the world plural societies, cosmopolitan societies. We have difference in terms of gender, access to justice, access to food and shelter, and so on. And COVID made very clear that depending on the state in which we were, we had access to vaccines or not. And I'm not talking about only finance here. It's not only about money. It's about political decisions translated into law. And I always put a colorful example for Latin America. I remember, it wasn't only Brazil. I remember AMLO, president of Mexico, telling people not to have the vaccine, and someone like Thalia, a pop artist, asking people to please have the vaccine. That has to do with state sovereignty. I'm not against state sovereignty, by the way. I think it has to do with a choice, whether we use it to cooperate or to dominate. And again, that has to do with having this kind of jigsaw puzzle in the sense of plural societies, domestically, regionally, and internationally, and the concept being manipulated of state sovereignty that seems to talk about legally and politically exclusive jurisdictions. I can do as I want within my territory and for my people. That's why I will never complain about Bolsonaro, Lula, and so on. I think it's much bigger than them, or much bigger than Milei in Argentina right now. My take, I tend to use an example I've been working on for many years, more than 20. My research has to do with territorial disputes. But the same theory, it can be applied to any phenomena. My specialism has to do with territorial dispute. This is the third of 3 books. This is a collection, and I'm going to leave an open invitation later for my Brazilian colleagues if they want to participate on the 4th one. And I've seen the same, although there are slight differences, I've seen several commonalities or similarities within the disputes in the Americas, in Europe and Asia, in Middle East and Africa, and what I call colonialism of the mind. And intentionally, I put President Obama in the picture because I don't understand how he got the Nobel Prize, having more conflict than Donald Trump in his administration. Again, this is not a criticism to his administration or to himself, it's just a fact. That has to do with, again, a manipulation of the media, what I tend to call mindset colonialism. What I'm trying to see and to show through my research, again, it's an ongoing research of about 20 years, that usually a lawyer, a specialist in political science or international relations, all my books and my research speak 3 languages, to lawyers, political scientists, and international relations. Someone will see something like this, any territorial disputes, Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, Russia, San Andres. I was days ago in Colombia, Nicaragua, and San Andres, and Providencia, Malvinas, Falklands, and even Amazonia. Yeah? When you have the multinationals, they tend to see either, and I use a metaphor, Sildavia Borduria, 2 states usually, and a third party, a third community. And they may focus the research and the solutions on territory, religion, wealth, or any other. This is usually the view. That's the situation now. What is the law doing? We have several concepts, the main ones being state and sovereignty. The concept of state stipulated in law, people in a territory with a government. The thing is, different sciences apply this concept under different conceptions, epistemological conceptions that have to do with methodological choices later, and assumptions that are not disclosed. Again, I'm not going to have the time, it's simply a hallmark I'm trying to make here. That will have an impact on the theories we study. As a lawyer, all my studies will have to do with one of these elements, territory. That's why lawyers in public international law, they don't tend to talk about people. It's something recent in public international law. We have natives in Latin America. We have natives in Australia. And only now we are talking about their rights. We are inclusive. We are not inclusive. We are following a trend. These people existed before, you know. And that's why political science tend to focus on other two elements, population and government. And we have theories such as liberalism, anarchism, and so on. Again, it is not that they do not know the other element. They focus the attention, and by default, assumptions, methodology, and so on different elements of the same state. Sovereignty, it's a bit more complicated because we don't have a stipulated definition. We have the basic one coming because of a historical situation from England, Hobbes, Leviathan, and Baudin in France, power struggle between the church and the king. And we have this kind of notion, political science, international relations and law, the highest, the most absolute and perpetual power. That has been used to talk about, I'm going to mention here only the first point, because I've been working with Russian colleagues for more than 10 years now, and I understand how Putin thinks, because my colleagues are from St. Petersburg State University. Putin is a lawyer from St. Petersburg State University. Again, I'm not defending Putin, I'm explaining. When he talks about Russia being sovereign or a colony, he talks about, for lawyers, in a Kelsenian way. He talks about level. Because whoever is sovereign in a territory and for people should be the highest lawmaker. If we have a higher lawmaker than him, that would be a colony, because I wouldn't be a sovereign. That's the way he thinks, vertical way. I will explain what I mean by vertical later. Again, not defending or criticizing him, it's understanding how someone thinks. And again, I can go on and on. Now, what is public international law doing with international disputes, such as Syria, Afghanistan, now on the news, Israel, and so on? We have a menu of articles, global articles, UN Charter. We have a menu of General Assembly resolution, the latest one in October about Israel and Palestine, the ceasefire. And we have apparently an understanding that should be, according to UN Charter, peaceful and permanent. Only two exceptions, self-defense and the Security Council. Self-defense, I could go as a lawyer and think of Hamas being an illegal force attacking Israel, the state. Palestine is not a state. Lawyers know that. Political scientists may think something else, but Palestine is not a state. So in law, Israel has the right to self-defense. There is an issue here, proportionality. Yeah? Again, we seem to have the rules in order to tackle Israel and Palestine, in order to tackle Russia. Not only organs, UN, we have more locally, regional, we have the Organización de Estados Americanos, or the Organization of American States, replicated in every single continent. They replicate the UN Charter. We have the same means. And we have, this is my classification for 2017, we have a menu of not only organs, procedures, but remedies. I classify them in unilateral, bilateral, and multilateral. So whether we follow the ECJ, International Court of Justice, arbitration, mediation, negotiation, we have a menu. My question since I was a child, how on earth this menu is not working? That's my take now, and it probably will take me 5 more minutes. Is that okay? Perfect. I tend to think, and I'm going to use this meta, it's not mine, it's coming from India, when 6 blind men, and I highlight men, bump for the first time into an elephant. and they start describing that elephant to each other. One of them may touch the leg, and he may say to the others, the elephant seems to be in a shape of a column. Somebody else says, you're completely wrong. A column is quite thick, quite big, quite tall. He's touching the tail. The elephant is wrinkly, it's thin, it has the shape of a rope. Another blind man says to the others, you are completely wrong. The elephant cannot have the shape of a pillar or a column. It cannot be a rope. The elephant has to be a wall, because he was touching the skin of the elephant, something massive, something big. The moral of the story, or the lesson behind the story, all of them in part were right. But all of them, because they couldn't communicate with each other efficiently, openly, in an inclusive form, they got it wrong. And intentionally, I put men: Boris Johnson, Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, Alberto Fernandez for Argentina, because right now he's the president, Imran Khan from Pakistan, Benjamin Netanyahu for Israel. They see the same conflict in a different way. And I put different disciplines: being a journalist, being a lawyer, being a political scientist, or even being a military man. We tend to see things unidimensionally. And I'm not only talking about disciplines here. I tend to, and I will not use the colonial positions. By the way, I'm not complaining or going against UK understanding, European understanding. This is not the point. The point is to learn what is not working in order to better. Because I'm sick of seeing criticism for the sake of criticism. So I don't really do the colonial, although I acknowledge the importance of the colonial positions, but that's not enough. It's not enough to simply get rid of the past. What do I do? Again, these are my books so far. By the way, the royalties go completely to Fundação Angelica Goulart. And what I do, I talk about pluralisms. We need to talk about pluralism, not only about states in terms of international law, relations, and politics. No, we need to acknowledge individuals take a part and communities. Communities such as indigenous communities. To put an example, I could talk about many examples. Individuals, for positive or for negative. When we had the Beagle issue between Chile and Argentina, and the UK was in the middle trying to offer a mediation, we almost end up in a war. It was because of someone, in particular individual, John Paul II, that we ended up signing a peace treaty. There is much more, but I'm simplifying my example. Or people like Putin, having that kind, or people like AMLO having that kind of repercussion, not only in law, but in politics. These people, communities or states, have different ways to play with each other in this dispute. I use here game theory. To me, the one that define a conflict are the host. They create the conflict or they maintain the conflict. Argentina and the UK in the case of the Falklands, Israel and the Palestinians or Hamas in the case of the conflict we are seeing now, Russia, Ukraine, and so on. Participants or attendees depends on the level of interference they have according to the host. I put this example usually because I've seen that all my life. For Argentina, the Falkland Islanders are attendees. They cannot be sat at any negotiation. That is right now what we see on Twitter. They are talking about public international law when they talk about the Falklands. Yeah? However, the UK has been very, very clear that the Falkland Islanders should be classed as participants. The UK will not have any negotiations with Argentina, and that, of course, means a deadlock. We are not moving on in terms of the conflict. Yeah? And again, the same can be talked about Israel, Russia, Kashmir, Gibraltar, and so on. Context. Contexts are plural. We do the either or. It's either domestic issue or international issue. We forget about the regional. And I'm not talking, let's put the positive now. The Americas, from Canada to Argentina, we are the most peaceful region in the world in terms of territorial dispute. We have other conflicts. We have drugs, we have guerrillas, we have other internal conflict. We have multinationals in Amazonia, perfect. But in terms of regional cooperation, we are the most peaceful. That's one of the reasons. And our guarantors are regional as well. That's one of the reasons. Realms, again, plural. It's not only about the law. That's why intentionally I use the word normative. There are different normative systems, such as religion. If Allah or God is telling me that I should be used as a human shield in order to protect my community, then I will let my children be shot by Israel. Yeah, that has to do with manipulating, and intentionally I brought the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran, because none of the holy books says that. Children are sacred, according to Allah or God. So whoever is shooting a child or using a child as a shield is against all the three main holy books. So people, please read the holy books yourself. That's why I don't talk about normative, legal, I talk about normative, because of course it has to do with law, but it's not as simple as law. Yeah? And finally, again, mode of existence, because there are many different elements and features that I will not explain. Some of them natural, like a river or like a mountain, some of them metaphysical, like God or Allah. What I'm trying to say, and to wrap up, now probably I'll take 2 minutes if you don't mind. A single approach will never work, and our governments know that. These issues are not solved because there is not will to solve them. And I've said that in Spanish, English, and in Portuguese. An only legal, only political, even only disciplinary approach doesn't work, because these disputes are highly emotional as well. It's not about winning, it's about seeing the other suffer, seeing the other one lose. It has to do with nationalism, passion, perpetuated, used by leaders, leader prestige as well. I talk about leader prestige in the book, and I don't have the time, but that's one of the many elements that has to do with my research. So there are rational and non-rational elements. So simple people, and I mean simple people, clever people, we were talking about that with Richard, they go to conferences, they are professors, they probably have more degrees than me, but with normal IQ, and they tend to see this in a dispute. That's not as simple. A dispute is this. A dispute is this. If we actually want to study a dispute, acknowledge a dispute, and try to resolve a dispute. And I talk about dimensions. A simple person will see a vertical or a horizontal view, whether I'm superior, inferior, or equal to. But there are many more ways. Suppose self-refer, to put this simple example, I create the conflict, and I perpetuate the conflict for my own interest, to keep my family in power, my ruling party in power, and so on. Again, simple example, just to make a point. Very briefly now, an invitation, 30 seconds now, and then 30 seconds, an open invitation to all my Latin American colleagues, or those who live in the Americas, because they understand our way of thinking. I don't believe in Global South, we are part of the world. I don't believe in Central and non-Central, we are part of the world. That's why this presentation, my main one in English, is from Brazil. It's an open invitation. I've already signed my contract for the 4th book. It should be out in 2025, and I'm inviting all colleagues from different disciplines in bilingual to work on this publication. I've already written 4 chapters, it will have 10 chapters. The only condition, bilingual, and the other one, I will sign the book, you will be acknowledged, but all royalties will go to Fundação Angelica Goulart. I said the same in Colombia and Peru, so it's not only in Brazil. And I'm going to finish with my 3 last slides, I think. I use a quotation from an author from Argentina. We have a choice. Men of diverse tribes, it's my own translation from Jorge Luis Borges. Men of diverse tribes, professing diverse religions, speaking different languages, have a strange decision to make. They are reasonable. They decided to forget about their differences and focus on their affinities. People, we have a choice. And I usually finish, this is not because I'm in Brazil, because I learned that from someone from Brazil had to come to Argentina 30 years ago to tell us, Down syndrome people were people, deaf people were people, blind people were people, color people were people. That was Xuxa Meneghel. And I do sign languages. I could do this chat using sign languages. So thank you, deaf people and hearing people. Because I've been part of the deaf community in Manchester for more than 10 years. This sign means not I love you, like people translate. This means I accept you the way you are, and that is why I love you. That is inclusion. It's not only about women, it's not about LGBT, it's not about black or white. That's trending, let's face it, we do that in UK academia as well, when we need to tick a box. Inclusion means I accept you the way you are, regardless of any difference. And pluralism has to do with these people. The very first picture, 2018. We were almost closing down Fundação Angelica Goulart. That's when I met them. And there you see Vinicius. Barbara is the one next to Freddy. And they've been together for quite a few years, thanks to Fundação Angelica Goulart. This is pluralism in action. This is cosmopolitanism in action. And we are still in Brazil, a sovereign country. So thank you very much for listening. My details, and obrigado você.
Thank you very much, George. I'm sorry you had to make this really short. I know there would have been a lot more to say. But now I'm going to pass the floor to Richard. We're going first name basis here today.
Yeah,
so
I appreciate that.
Richard.
Otherwise you'd have to take a second breath for my last name.
Richard, the floor is yours, please.
So first of all, I just want to say thanks for having me along and putting this on, and thanks Jorge for sharing your book with me. It's nice to get a free book. I enjoyed reading it. I guess the first thing I kind of want to ask, based on your presentation, actually, you talked about like you prefer actions over words. You see them as more important. And one of the, it might be a misreading or whatnot, but one of the impressions I got, especially when I read the conclusion of the book, that you see law as a way to influence behavior, both that of individuals and also more abstract things like states, for example. But again, the way, coming back to your point about actions, not words, the way I sort of see it, laws are just words, right? Written down on paper, created by mainly privileged people. And I'm just wondering whether you would push that the other way, in the sense of law doesn't actually influence behavior that much, and whether it doesn't. A funny example I think about COVID, just an observation I had when I was here during a part of the pandemic, was at one point masks weren't mandated anymore legally, and yet most people were wearing them and continuing to interact in a way that the law didn't mandate anymore. And then when I see laws potential lack of influence at the international level as well, I might be wrong in this, but one of the ways I see international law is not so much a means of influencing the way states act, but as a tool for states to use to sort of provide some sort of legitimacy and justify their conduct. And I'm just wondering, just to start off, like our chat, like what your thoughts are in terms of, does law really influence behavior that much at the individual level and also at the state level?
Well, thank you very much, Richard. Yes, it's the same answer I could give the chicken and the egg. They influence each other. Now, to which point, when we were talking before the presentation, I disclosed I don't really believe in human rights. What do I mean by that? Normative human rights, because I see exactly the same. Not only international law, but domestic as well. I see usually lack of access, lack of will to give people access to. So in that sense, yeah, law should follow and tends to follow facts as well. But it's another tool to influence behavior. Is it the most important tool? No, to me the most important tool has to do with will. Yeah, it's a factual. However, if you only remain in the factual realm, that's why I tend to talk about axiological realm, normative realm, and factual realm. Because if you stay in the factual realm, it's just too naive, because then you will have states, individuals, or communities manipulating the law for their own benefit. So it should, in an ideal world, and I do in that sense ideal theory, in an ideal world, they should go hand in hand. That's my short answer. I could, talk forever about it. My short answer, they should influence each other. Which one first? To me, it should be political will, and then law should do something about it. But the bare minimum, law.
Okay, that's really interesting. So I guess the next point, because you talk about the three types of agents, you focus on individuals, communities, and states, and I get the impression that you think there should be, I don't know, better sort of communication between those sort of three actors, and I'm wondering whether you see communities, however you want to define them, as sort of the bridge between better sort of, let's just say, integration between how states function and then how individuals function and how the two interact. Is that, am I right in?
You're reading me right. I'm going to add something else, not only community, regions, because right now, in order to do something about Israel and Palestine and Russia, you need a region, and it has to do with communities as well. Acknowledging that Crimea had issues before Putin invaded. Again, this is not in defense of, but they had issues with Ukraine before they were being cleansed. So it has to do with giving communities a legal and political place. Or coming back to Latin American indigenous communities, we have border communities such as the Mapuches in between Argentina and Chile. They don't define the same according to European understanding of state sovereignty. The word Mapuche is part of my recent research. Mapu means territory. Che means people ontologically. They see themselves in law, according to their way of understanding law, as part of the territory. So unless we embrace communities, this kind of either or individuals or state will not work, will perpetuate. And in addition, individuals, to what extent? Right now, the most evolved legal and political, but in particular acknowledged by law, not even the UN, the only one with 4 articles is the EU law, the European Union law, acknowledging individuals to a point. So there is much more to do in terms of public international law. To assume individuals will have a place, I'm optimistic, but I'm realistic as well. I see a very slow evolution. That's why a compromise right now could be communities. But to an extent, individuals, not now, I tend to have a vision in the future will have a place.
I guess, so you see, for example, indigenous peoples as communities, is that correct?
It may be gender, it may be LGBT, maybe it depends on the situation, and it depends on the particular dispute you are having. We are not talking about territorial dispute now, we may talk about social struggle.
Well, so this sort of brings me to a point that ties into how you sort of see sovereignty, because I'm wondering, especially because you cite quite a bit of literature that I personally think that people have read sovereignty to mean supremacy.
Correct.
So that's something that I have a little bit of an issue with, because I don't think the two things are the same. And the reason
I agree.
So this kind of brings me to my point. Like, there's limits on sovereignty in the sense, like, for example, human rights put limits on sovereignty. The rule of law does. And then when you talk about institutionally as well, like, you've got separation of powers under like constitutional systems. And I'm just wondering whether you think, I don't know how the best way to phrase this is, to be honest, but whether you see sovereignty is actually that big of an issue, because you sort of seem to stack sovereignty up as this big problem that's not really a problem, if that makes sense.
I don't see a problem. The actual notion of sovereignty is flexible enough to accept limitations, because we have limitations that I accept. Let's say I'm a state. I will sign a treaty between Brazil and Argentina. Brazil and Argentina accept limitation, reciprocal limitation. That has to do with bilateral limitation. That has to do with what you're calling human rights, international law. That has to do with what I call environmental limitations in law. And by default, sovereignty will have limitations, factual, normative. But the problem is the axiological side, whether I want to see these limitations or whether I don't want to see with these limitations, whether I am America or the UK or whether I am Bolivia or Brazil, and I will have to accept them, or I may have a choice. That's the axiological point. So when they use the concept of sovereignty to claim I am supreme, that's an axiological choice. It's not an ontological truth. And where this is coming from, if I go back to my research, it has to do with using holy books to perpetuate, because it has to do with God or Allah being the supreme. But I have to say, people read the holy books because even God, Allah, put limitation to himself. He's accepted many commitments with humans, one of them the rainbow. The rainbow is an agreement between God or Allah and people. When Noah and God himself or Allah himself put himself limitations. So whatever the understanding in terms of supreme authority, supreme as synonym of absolute, I dare to say that's completely wrong, and that's completely a manipulation of the concept, because the concept itself accepts limitations.
Julia, did you want to come in?
We still have minutes, so you may go on.
Okay, cool. So the other thing I think you'll be familiar with as well, because like, you obviously wrote a book on this subject, but I'm wondering how you see residual sovereignty, because you mentioned you focus on indigenous communities at one point, and you seem to really care about integration and respect for other people. And I'm just wondering how you see the concept of residual sovereignty fitting into your idea between cosmopolitanism, sort of not versus sovereignty, but the two integrating, i.e., and what I mean, just to be clear, by at least my understanding of residual sovereignty is an entity that used to have sovereignty over a territory, for example, but then doesn't anymore because of a state asserting its own sovereignty over it, and then how those two things can be reconciled. And I'm coming at this sort of from a position of bias as well, because I, as you may know through the accent, I'm from Scotland, and at one point in time Scotland was a state, and then you can make an argument that it consented to be part of the UK, and now an understanding is that the UK is formed based on Scotland's consent. And then I'm just wondering how the UK's sovereignty over, you know, that whole territory impacts whether Scotland actually has any residual sovereignty. I respect for its own
they do. They could
power
apply.
and authority to govern itself, and also how that sort of applies to like non-countries as well. For example, communities in the Amazon and that sort of thing, like Brazil.
Or Tibet, or Palestinian, so there, it's not only here.
I don't know if they would be examples I would think of, but yeah, just I'm curious to see what your views are in terms of sovereignty of a state interacting with the residual sovereignty of something that's not considered a state anymore. But yeah, exactly.
State, according to our way of thinking right now, in law. That's why I didn't explain, because it was just a hallmark. But when I talk about the theories in law, they refer to one element, the territory. And what you're talking about residual, you're talking about people. Yeah, there is a very slow move, including people, and talking about not popular sovereignty, because people tend to see popular sovereignty. That's a legal fiction. You know, we have representatives. We are talking about claiming rights in the case of people without necessarily a territory or without being acknowledged territorial jurisdictions, such as the natives, Tibetans, or Palestinians. To put an example, yeah, you talk about the Scottish case, but it's even clearer because they have a self-determination in case of Scotland. And we can talk about self-determination as well. So again, there is a very slow move. The problem is right now you go against mainstream way of thinking, because in law, sovereignty goes hand in hand with territory. It has a reason, because these territories will have a central government, and if you give people residual sovereignty, they may have a claim to a territory, and you may end up with dismembrating territories. So there is an effect, a domino effect that could happen. So as a lawyer, my recommendation would be, well, you set criteria, you know, when some people will have, because there is no actual criteria to decide self-determination. There are broad elements. You will have a permanent population, you will have an excess of power that may include violation of human rights. So you may argue that there is criteria coming from the International Court of Justice, but there is not per se legal criteria to talk about self-determination in law or residual sovereignty, as you call it. It can happen, coming back to it has to do with political will to make it happen.
So based on what you just said there in terms of sovereignty attached to territory, right? I'm wondering how you think, especially because we talk about a multi-dimensional group of actors interacting in a particular space, right? I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the idea of sovereignty, but not offline with respect to territory.
I got you, yeah.
But online, and the different interactions between, for example, private corporations and governments and just people interacting online as well, and the idea of private sovereignty as well, because they're, and I think you could say,
or even virtual sovereignty.
So,
we are already talking about that.
How your sort of theory that you try and explain in the book plays out online as opposed to offline between states and territories.
Well, I think that's the future right now. It's happening now. What you're talking about, and the law is well behind, because right now we think of sovereignty in terms of territorial sovereignty, jurisdictions. Who is the lawmaker? Who applies the law in that particular jurisdiction, and to whom? Again, the classical people, territory, and government. We are far behind in domestic law, regional law, and international law, or global international law. How it will play? I believe in top-down, bottom-up. Our constitutions, our national constitutions, need to do something about it. I mean, I'll put an example, because again, it's my next book, and I will talk about it. But the example is all our 35, I believe, national constitutions in the Americas, from Canada to Argentina. They all include the right to territory, for the natives. But with the proviso, they talk about the right to territory in the sense of human rights, access to food, access to shelter, so basic access. There is no actual right to self-determination in terms of the territory. It's being very cleverly designed by lawyers. So there should be a change, bottom up, in that sense, domestic, I'm talking bottom up. Now, if you don't have a change in public international law in the way, because we don't have the normative in public international law acknowledging right of indigenous communities, to put the same example. But if you don't have a way from top down to have access to those rights, then the law will remain futile. It will remain completely useless. To me, and this is my reading, to me, the clue is in the region. When there is cooperation between the countries, you may be able to acknowledge what our national constitutions say and what the international says, because we need institutions at the regional level to be able to give people access to. In most of these cases, these people cross borders. And I'm not even talking about natives now. You know, we have quite an influence of cross-border in minorities. And now going beyond, Kashmir is an example. Gibraltar is an example. So again, it has to do with the combination to me. But again, it's not either or. It has to do with bottom-up, changing our constitutions to embrace what's happening now, national constitutions. And international law, we have the international law. I dare to say we don't need to do much, but give access to that international law. How you do that? UN is useless. It's proven to be useless. We need the regions to do something about it.
Thank you very much, Jorge.
I was going to bite on that last comment.
Oh,
I know, I can see
sorry.
your face.
No, we still have 1 minute if you want to give it a go. Are
No,
you
we
sure?
can chat about that over a beer, I think. But yeah.
Okay.
I don't think the UN's personally useless. Basically, what I was going to say is that I think it depends on the institution and what they're trying to achieve. But yeah, we can talk about that later.
I'm talking Security Council and as General Assembly. I'm not talking about the special organs.
All right. I'm sorry to wrap it up here, but we can always continue the discussion afterwards. Now I'm going to open the floor to the public, so you might as well make questions. If anyone has a question, we're going to pass the mic. Again, if you want to make the question in Portuguese, just try to make it short so I can translate it to them. We also have online possibilities. So if you're watching us on YouTube and you want to send a question, please do so. In case no one wants to make a question, I have one. Because I also got the opportunity to read your piece. I'm actually going to skip my first question and go straight to the second one, as you mentioned indigenous peoples quite a lot of times already. I think it was something around 5th chapter, not sure, but you mentioned the need to look for characteristics such as, and here I quote, gender, ethnicity, age, skill level, local government support, among others, as a more effective way to address global issues, right? Do you mind if I read my questions? Because I was formulating while I was reading. Yeah. In Brazil, we are seeing some indigenous representatives claiming space in traditional politics, especially proposing new ways to look at development and progress, for example. We have a prominent indigenous leader, writer, philosopher, and activist called Ailton Krenak. I bet you heard of him, who has been writing about a new concept of development that aligns closely with other indigenous leaders around Latin America, the concept of bem viver. As you might have heard, this new concept addresses the development as a matter of human well-being instead, and human well-being not necessarily tied to increased wealth. Krenak, along with Sonia Guajajara and Célia Chacriabá and other indigenous peoples in the Congress now, are making an effort to enter mainstream politics, and they confront directly with conservative representatives that export Brazilian commodities, for example, what we call agronegócio, for example. Responsible also for putting the country in an international economic path that brings money to major Brazilian metropolis. Here, to me, it is a clear example of pluralism, right? that indigenous people are trying to make this effort, as sovereignty is something very valuable to them as well, because this plays a major role over how they're going to protect their own territories, in which they depend on their territories to live, and they should be sovereign of those territories. Well, I mentioned this conflict and this conflict of interest in this case as an example of how I don't really see, or as I wanted to explain, how the idea of cosmopolitanism could benefit those people and those indigenous people who might have a different view over sovereignty and territorial disputes. When it comes to, we have Brazil, but we also have different parts of Brazil and different types of sovereignty inside Brazil, being indigenous causes a big issue to this. So I want to hear your comments.
Thank you very much. Very relevant. And I'm going to borrow, and I'm going to invite you as well, for the next book, because I didn't know about the example. It's very similar to the Mapuche without, the implications in Brazil. I didn't know this. Very interesting. Cosmopolitanism has to do with embracing pluralisms, units of concern, according to political scientists. Now, this is all fine and good when we talk about inclusion in a political speech, and that's probably what's happening. I'm not that familiar with examples. I'm going to make assumptions, and I dare to be wrong with these assumptions. I've seen it in other countries. So I'm assuming in the political speech, these people, these communities are being included. The problem is in law, and that's when you bring state sovereignty. So in terms of cosmopolitanism, the political view, they may be included because you are claiming as a political party, or as a political leader, or regardless of the political affiliation, you will claim that you will hear them, you will do something about them, you will acknowledge them. However, if in the norm you don't acknowledge them, you are not acknowledge them as a cosmopolitan country. So in law, that would tell me that Brazil is not that cosmopolitan. Because they are using state sovereignty as an example, because they perpetuate the territorial understanding of. Now, a proviso or one clarification I have to make. These cases can be manipulated on both sides. It's not only the ruling party, the political party, or whatever, because it has happened with the Mapuche community when they first started more than 10 years ago. We had 3 communities. Right now there are more than 12 communities, some of them not even Mapuches. So what I'm trying to say when defining community, that's lawyers' work. So this is the first steps. But we have to be cautious how to, yes, the law needs to evolve, especially in countries so plural, like Brazil. So if we want to embrace cosmopolitanism, which means including pluralism, not only in political speech, but in law, we need to somehow accommodate communities within that game. It may not be in terms of creating a new country. There are different levels. When people talk about auto-determination, self-determination, people get confused and relate this as equating to independence. That's far from the truth in law. Self-determination means deciding my political status in law and politics as a community. So it may be a different levels of autonomy. Russia has good examples with countries, former Soviet countries like Georgia. They have different layers of sovereignty. We can replicate examples. I'm not inventing anything. I mean, it's been done before by acknowledging. But again, the proviso, being very careful in terms of defining the criteria how to see a community in law. Because again, it can be manipulated on the other side. And then you may have, it happens in Brazil, but then you may give multinationals a legal weapon to have or create a fictional community in Brazil and exploit parts of Brazil. Am I clear? Yeah. So right now I say Brazil, politically, you may have cosmopolitanism. In law, it's clear because some people are more equal than others in law. That's clear. That's what I meant by UN. By the way, I'm using the opportunity because a General Assembly or Security Council, I'm not talking about special organs, but you see clearly that they have the equal sovereign principle, but then some countries are more equal than others, or some states are more equal than others. So yeah, coming back to you, yeah, it's the law is well behind here.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jorge. Now I'm going to be headed to our last round of debate. Okay, I'm going to pass the floor again to Richard so he can make more of questions and comments.
Yeah, sure. I've got a bunch. At one point, actually, a few points in the book, you assert quite a bit that focus from like states or researchers, people, community, whatever, tends to fall on the differences between groups, states, whatever, as opposed to the affinities between them. Now, and you frame that in a way that's like a bad thing. Now, I guess my first question is, do you really see differences being a bad thing? And then in terms of more onus being placed on differences as opposed to affinities, again, when I think about the stuff that I've learned about international law, I'm not so sure that's true, because you have things that do integrate across countries. Like, for example, again, I'll come back to human rights. And then the whole premise of the UN as well, you read the charter, is to maintain peace and security, right? And I see that as something that's like a common component that states are working towards. So I just wanted to like maybe just push you a little bit on that in terms of, one, I guess the question is, why are differences a problem? And then the second part of that is, do you really think the differences outweigh the affinities when you're talking about exchanges at that level?
No, on the contrary, they show me, because they may have misrepresenting what I think. No, difference on the contrary, enrich. Yeah, but what I'm trying to say, maybe I didn't convey that in such a clear manner, so tell me later where, but it has to do with manipulating differences in order to make a point, to make a stand, or to make a decision, such as justifying a war, or justifying an invasion, or justifying humanitarian intervention. No, difference to me enrich. That's what I'm trying to do with my work. We are all different at the level of the state, at the level of the community, and the level of the individual. Now, it is because of our differences that we can do more. I do strongly believe in cooperation. So no, if I'm representing myself, tell me where. Because it has to do with, that's the axiological choice. It's manipulating. So you can manipulate any of these concepts, even differences, for a positive or for a negative. To me, differences should be embraced in law and in fact, and they can enrich.
But that's what I mean. From the book, I got the impression that because you focus mainly on territorial disputes, that the differences aren't embraced, and that results in...
They are not, right now they are not.
Okay, so... I remember you said this at one point in the book, you'd see territorial disputes as a zero-sum game, right? If someone...
Right now they are... I see what you mean now.
No, so just to bring me to the point, like, I'm just wondering whether that's actually true all the time, that because I do think in some territorial disputes it's not a zero-sum game, and there isn't necessarily need to be a loser or a winner, in that both parties can come away with something. And I remember two examples of this, because when I was reading the book, I thought of counterpoints in the sense of there was that really, I think it was almost comical dispute between, I think it was Denmark and Canada. There was this little island somewhere, I think it's somewhere like the northwest of Greenland. I think it got called like Whiskey Island or something like that. And it involved like a dispute of essentially both countries replacing the other's flag with their own. And then I think it was in 2020, they came to like an amicable, I think it was 2020 or 2022, recently they came to like an amicable like settlement. And the friction involved, if you think about it, especially when you compare it to things like armed conflict, was very minimal. And then I see that there as both parties essentially maybe not winning, but neither of them really lost. And then another example I thought of, which I found really funny, was I think a few years ago, the Netherlands and Belgium had this weird little territorial dispute, I think over like a river or something. And what they ended up doing was basically just saying, all right, you take our side and we'll take your side. And they switched, because they basically said that makes more sense than having a debate about whose jurisdiction fits on essentially what bit of land. So I'm just, again, to push you a little bit on, like, do you really think territorial disputes always have to be win-loss?
No, on the contrary. The zero-sum game, I know it because it's one of the phrases I like. The zero-sum game is the right now, what we have now. I do, and again, this is a strong belief of me, that actual territorial disputes could be used in favor of humanity. Places like Jerusalem, places like Malvinas or Falkland, places like Crimea, they are missed opportunities because they could provide so much more. Right now it's a zero-sum game. And although I'm optimistic, I have to be realistic here. I doubt something will change in that regard. However, it's a pity because I do believe that Russia, Ukraine, Jerusalem, and Palestine, not Hamas, Palestine, Malvinas, the UK, they are missing opportunities because by using these territorial disputes for cooperation, they could create havens, financial havens, legal havens, political havens. I think Kashmir as well. I think and that could be used to create a new frame, legal and political, for Antarctica, because that is the future. Yeah, but that's wishful thinking. I don't want to sound too negative. That's wishful thinking. I hope to see that in my lifetime. I think it will happen eventually, but I doubt I will see it in my
So you
life.
just see it like a territorial dispute as a claim over that to try and justify doing something that they
There is something else. Yeah, definitely.
For example,
There is
I think about
something else.
Russia to use force and
Russia is more
acquire.
complicated. Russia is not only natural resource, because you do have natural resources there, but it's as well political prestige, geostrategic location. It has to do with NATO. It has to do with the European Union. So it's not only natural resources. And by the way, it's not only about people. All these disputes are people are there, but it's not about people. People are usually the excuse.
Hang on, what do you mean when you say people are usually the excuse? As in,
I'm helping Crimeans, I'm helping Palestinians, I'm helping Israelis, I'm helping Falkland Islanders.
okay.
Yeah, of course.
So like you're separating, the group of the
Of course,
state
they are
versus
important. Please,
no,
don't. I work for people, not for institutions. Of course, to me, they are the priority, and I mean that. But our governments right now are using them as the reason/excuse to do something else.
Okay, so then this really fits in, I think, segues a bit into what you were talking about throughout the book, and then at the end where you start to talk about universal law. Do you see things like territory in the end being something that's kind of just in our heads and intersubjective and not that helpful? And we should
not that
be
helpful.
let me finish the point. Like, in terms of, I'm just wondering what you meant when you were talking about universal law versus something like international law or domestic, whether you see that as like a merging of the two, because you talk a little bit about the EU, and I'm just wondering where you see universal laws, as you write about it in the book, as some sort of merging between the domestic and the international to create something, I'm not saying the same as the EU, but something similar where there's more, let's just say, merging, and the whole idea of territory can, in some respects, sort of fall away.
I don't say merging, I think coordinating, because when you say merging, people, especially lawyers, may assume there are levels, and that's what I don't want to offer either, because then you will have countries very dissimilar, such as Pakistan and America or the UK or Argentina, accepting rights such as LGBT or rejecting them completely. And again, I'm not against or in favor of any legal, I'm simply describing a legal regime. Yeah, I'm not talking about democracies or anything else. That's why intentionally I talk about democracies. However, some democracies are more rigid than others. Or not LGBT, death penalty, for instance, different legal systems. So if you decide to merge, then you will have, as a lawyer, to decide which law prevails, which law is superior, which law is inferior. To me, I went for soft, very flexible principle, and again, these are the first steps. You can add more, you can take some, but to me, it's high time we need to coordinate something using international, regional, and domestic. Domestic meaning national constitution, because the national constitution allows you to have death penalty in certain cases. It will conflict with some others, will respect human rights completely. So in that sense, I'm talking coordination. Coming back to your point about, I don't see that happening anytime soon. That's the honest truth.
Okay, fair enough. No, but I sort of see it as, like I said, it's already happening. Like you mentioned, for example, in Latin America, you see quite a lot of pride in the sense that you cooperate in a way that doesn't happen in other, like you've got Mercosur.
Regionally, yes, but Latin America, that's why I said the whole Americas, they are the most peaceful regions for a reason. Our constitutions are highly similar. The faith is highly similar. So there are many components. When you go back, I will have probably more of a problem because I already plan, the next steps will be either Africa, Middle East, or that will become more problematic because then you will see pluralisms that are more controversial, such as the normative and religion, the normative and, in this sense, it's not only because I'm Latin America, I start from America, it's probably the easiest of the regions.
So do you see a way of like reconciling these sort of, let's say, domestic values or laws when they conflict with international? Like
no, values no. That's why intentionally I talk about cosmopolitanism, positive, exclusive. We are not, I see that in the future. I don't see that now. So I will see. I'm not going to see that. Sorry, I'm lying and I never lie. I'm not going to see that. You're talking of Star Trek or Star Wars. So it will happen eventually. But right now, humanity is not ready to have plural values coordinating. I'm asking. This is the bare minimum. I'm asking. Core principles that accept we're all humans. Core principles that accept we should all have access to. Am I clear? But I'm not asking people from all over the world, countries from all over and communities to accept similar values because we are not ready. That's the honest answer. That's the next step.
But you think we should accept?
Completely. But we are not ready. And again, I'm not. I'm going to be honest in English here. I'm not. I don't know if I'm a visionary or I'm completely deluded. I do believe, no, I'm being honest here. I have a strong faith that it will happen, and this is faith talking, not the scientist in me, but it will not happen in my lifetime.
But then just think about just a bit more like, I guess, reflexively might be the right word. When you talk about like, you see the importance of like merging of values so we all sort of like get together in our shared humanity, for lack of a better phrase. Like, isn't that coming from a position of like you've studied a lot about these sort of things, coming at it from quite a position of privilege, say these things are really important, we should all unite around them, but other people in other parts of the world will care about other stuff, and it's just basically, mate, you're talking a load of shite, essentially. Like, so I'm just wondering why you see that sort of coming together as such a good thing, and because you're essentially might be imposing your views on others.
No, it's not imposing. It's simply a sort of
like
option. No, never imposing. No.
Okay.
It's a sort of option because the things we have are not working. So I dare to suggest an option. No. I'm not telling you this is the answer. I'm telling you we need another option, and I'm offering another option. But this is not because sure. That's a no.
So then bringing this back to like the territorial disputes, to do it in a way that like the two examples I gave of the Canada-Denmark and the Netherlands-Belgium.
That would be the ideal.
No, exactly. So to have more peaceful means of reconciling
and there are peaceful means.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're definitely in agreement.
And I'm going to go back to here because I'm going to use this comment to go back to Vinicius, because a good way to respect pluralism is what we do here. But you need people to think that way, to embrace the different. So whether you are, and that was Xuxa Meneghel 30 years ago. It didn't matter if you were a hooligan from Boca Juniors, and that's Fundação Xuxa Meneghel. It doesn't matter if you're a hooligan from Flamengo. It doesn't matter if you're LGBT. I've seen it. It doesn't matter if you're a crianza. I've seen it. We are there all together. But people, and I'm going to probably, and if you don't mind, leave the floor to Vinicius to say something, to close. But we need to embrace, and that's the whole message of reconciliation. We need to recognize our humanity, and that we are lacking. We are not better than anybody else. We are not worse than anybody else, and that's what we are lacking. And this is simply an option, and I'm not being modest. I mean that this is an option. If people want to take it on board, fine. If people don't want to take it on board, fine as well. But it's high time we need to think of solutions, not problems, and we are lacking, that. And the best example I can think is Xuxa's program, TV show. They made it a reality. Yeah, because it wasn't just a pretty show. They made it into reality. Can it happen? I've seen it happen. It has to do with will.
Yeah, so just to pick up on that last point, because you talk about will, and again, I think of this from a lens, some of the literature I've been reading recently is on privilege. You talk about, I think when you talk about will and people doing stuff, actions, not words, is that not putting quite a lot of responsibility on the individual, as opposed to, for example, states or corporations fulfilling duties that they actually hold, i.e. obligations, both in law and you could say other ways, morally too, to actually do more instead of putting the onus on individuals and saying, like, mate, just roll your sleeves up and get on with stuff. That's very easy to say for certain people and not, I don't think you could say that for a lot of other people.
So, you're asking the right person here. I don't believe in leaders. Our leaders are failing globally, regionally, locally. Bolsonaro failed. I dare to say Lula probably will fail. Milei, it has to do with us. And you are completely right here. Some people may not have the skills. It's not only about will. Some people may not have the opportunity. Some people may not have even the platform. What does it take? People like Xuxa. It's a pity Xuxa, because I'm not as popular, but people like her with a bit of social awareness, because I couldn't agree more. People themselves, however, if we wait for leaders to make the change, they will not. They will perpetuate this. Of course, I can be wrong, and there may be exceptional leaders. Please don't get me wrong. I don't see right now in the world any exceptional leaders, from religious leaders to political leaders. They are perpetuating or feeding or somehow washing their hands in terms of disputes. Again, political, religious, moral leaders, this new, all the holy books talk about them. I call them false prophets, not paraphrasing, motivational speakers and so on and so forth. They are making something out of people. That's why, to me, the change has to do, and I've been saying this, we need an intellectual revolution. I don't believe in force. I believe in intellectual revolutions. I think mankind or humankind, if I may, I know it's the wrong expression, but embracing all genders, humankind needs an intellectual revolution. And it has to do, suppose, and I mean, I'm grateful to Fundação Getulio Vargas, but I had to come here for Vinicius to be here. Or Xuxa had to be here to create the Fundação. So you need people, and I'm not putting myself in any level, but you need people, if they cannot do them themselves, because they are ready to talk. But you give them the platform,
sure.
And it has to do with networking.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
It's
George.
a very personal answer.
No, sure.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry we have to wrap it up because I need to open the floor again for the public. We will have all of us will have the opportunity to make our last comments. So I think we will have time for that. Once more, I open the mic to the floor in case anybody has any questions. Again, for you watching us online, you may send us our questions as well. In case nobody wants to, I also have one more question. Because you mentioned that in your book that your discussion should also help making sense of territorial disputes. I guess this is something main to your discussion. And I couldn't avoid thinking that we are now living two simultaneous wars that have not only something very similar in between them, but something very similar to what we thought we had more or less overcome. What I mean is that in several strands of political science, more specifically in the liberal international political science, there's this consensus that after the world wars, what we called world wars, nations have been able to, more often than not, resolve their conflicting interests through cooperation, mechanisms of cooperation such as international law. Well, we know from the fact that wars haven't stopped showing, but from the 50s as 47 or 50s to early 20s, the wars that caught our attention were mostly from Cold War period, conflicts in the Middle East, and those wars were more, they longed more for global alliances and other types of political conflicts, not as much as territorial disputes. And now we're back to two wars that have this very preeminently, right? Territorial dispute, self-determination, identity. We can't ignore that those wars have merged through decades of conflict and poor management of international organizations and states. And I would like to know, how do you think the idea of pluralism, that's something very central in your piece, may help us understand such current crisis and what it distincts from previous ways we saw it? Like what I would like you to explain more what pluralism of pluralisms is and how it may help us understand our current crisis.
Thank you very much, Julia. Obrigado. Pluralism, again, there are many pluralisms. People tend to assume pluralism has to do with, and I explain it very briefly, with people, and I refer to people, individuals, communities, and states, legally and politically. But the reality is pluralism has to do with different ways of, such as a context I talk about. That's why I insist on not only either or the domestic or either or, the international, it has to do with the regional, not only either or the norm, whether a religious norm or a moral or a legal, but as well, to embrace the fact and the way we understand them, the axiology, and how do we value them, how do we manipulate them intentionally or unintentionally, sometimes even non-intentionally, because our own methodologies, our like Putin, again, I'm not defending nor criticizing, but the way we understand, that's an axiological a value judgment. The way we operate, whether we are a host of the dispute, whether we're a participant, a simple viewer, whether a viewer could do something by bringing a peaceful mediation, because a viewer could do something potentially. This is what I tend to call, not in the book, but washing my hands, when we see atrocities happening and not intervening. Because we tend to manipulate the concept of humanitarian intervention or R2P, responsibility to protect quite a bit in international law, politics, and relations, and so on. So again, the mistake to me is when we talk about pluralism, we tend to simplify the concept, trying to sound a bit more inclusive, and I talk about people, whether individuals, communities, and states. But pluralism, if you want to actually study, understand this territorial dispute, it's much more than, subjects. It has to do with the way the subjects are perceived, the way the subjects they perceive, where they play and how they play, and so forth and so on. So coming back to you, and again, I don't want to sound pessimistic, you mentioned too, and I assume you were talking about Russia, Ukraine because of Crimea, or the region, and Palestine, Hamas, and Israel. I dare to say, and I don't want to sound negative, but I dare to say this is only the start. We will see, and this has to do with particular areas, again, location, resources, and so on. But the next, we will see, and I was telling them, students in the UK, I had a student from Kashmir, you are next, Antarctica is next, because water is next, unless we change our way of thinking this. I think this is only the start. These conflicts are getting more and more violent, not only the atrocity we see in terms of human rights and people dying, but I don't know if you are familiar. I know you don't have social media, and I have slim access because I don't really do social media. I'm a bit old school here, so I only use it to publicize and so on. But I've never seen the level of virtual conflict that this is creating and hate that this is creating. And again, this will be a domino effect, and these two wars are only the start. Like the pandemic, and I've been telling my dad the same. I saw the pandemic before coming. I didn't know it was going to be a pandemic, but I did see something was coming. And this is, unless we change as humans, our way of thinking, this is only the start. And I'm not talking about holy books, by the way, or prophecies. They're far from that. We need to change mindset. And my message of reconciliation, it's not about being selfish, it's not about being self-centered, it's about acknowledging there is somebody else next to me, around me, and it's likely to be different ways of seeing reality. It's a simple, since I was a child, it's a simple way, cleverly.
Can I come in?
It looks like Richard has something else to say, so I'll let...
I don't know if I answer.
You did, thank you very much.
No, but if you want to wrap up, it was just...
We still have 5 minutes, would that be enough?
Can I, guilty pleasure, because I want Vinicius to wrap up, because...
We will all have time to make comments. Do we want Vinicius to jump in now?
Vinicius, quería una pregunta para Vinicius. ¿Cómo la gente puede ayudar ahora a la Fundación Angelica Goulart? ¿Cuál es el desafío ahora y cómo se puede ayudar?
Bom, abrindo espaço aqui, né, como a gente está hoje aqui, já é uma grande forma de ajudar, né? o trabalho social, não só da Fundação, como de outras instituições. A Fundação, ela hoje, né, sobrevive, né, financeiramente a partir de financiamentos de editais, seja ele público ou de outras instituições internacionais ou nacionais, né, como outras fundações e associações, e alguns editais empresariais. Então a gente vive dos projetos que a gente escreve e são aprovados, e a gente faz parcerias, né, muito, assim, parcerias técnicas, por exemplo, né, os projetos da Fundação. Nós temos a Embrapa, que é uma empresa brasileira reconhecida, a gente tem uma parceria com a Fiocruz, a gente tem uma parceria com o sítio Roberto Burlemax, nós já tivemos recentemente privada com o Itaú, né, com o grupo de moda Soma, que é a Animale, e outras marcas mais, né, que apoiam a Fundação em alguns projetos voltados para mulheres. E temos um projeto a longo prazo com uma agência alemã, né, que é a Kinder File, que apoia a Fundação no projeto com crianças e adolescentes. E dentro do trabalho com juventude, alguns editais que a Fundação segue escrevendo e sendo apoiado, né, pela Secretaria Municipal de Juventude, Secretaria Municipal de Cultura. Porém, o maior desafio da Fundação é a gente manter a estrutura da Fundação, né, patrimonial, os espaços da Fundação, custeios administrativos e de manutenção mesmo do espaço, né, algumas obrigações que a Fundação tem da parte de auditoria, né, e outras formalidades, são receitas que não vêm dessas parcerias que eu citei aqui, e a Fundação busca receitas próprias para isso. Nesse sentido, tivemos por muitos anos, né, essa acolhida da Xuxa, né, e hoje a gente busca também outros mantenedores, pessoas físicas próximas, né, algumas empresas que apoiam a Fundação com doações regulares. Então, as pessoas podem apoiar o trabalho da Fundação sendo um voluntário, né, apoiando a Fundação financeiramente. Nós temos projetos aprovados dentro de leis de incentivo, então assim, as pessoas podem apoiar com recursos de doações de incentivos fiscais, né? Quem, por exemplo, tem algo a pagar na declaração de imposto de renda, pode doar para a Fundação e ter uma dedução de 100% do valor que foi doado. É uma forma também de apoiar a Fundação, né? Então, poder conhecer um pouco mais da Fundação, né, se aproximar da Fundação, ou de algum outro trabalho social que é importante, né? Muita coisa que foi dita hoje aqui, né, para a gente trabalhar a questão da solidariedade entre nós, né? Então, essas são algumas maneiras de se apoiar, né, o trabalho da Fundação, aproximando a Fundação. Às vezes a gente tem uma proximidade com alguma empresa, com algum executivo, né, poder apresentar o trabalho da Fundação dentro desse contexto. Es una puerta que se abre.
Y otra cosa, y explica también que tiene gastos fijos la fundación, que las empresas estas no pagan la luz, no pagan el gas, no pagan lo administrativo.
Quando eu disse que essas parcerias da Fundação não pagam o custeio da Fundação, né, é tudo isso, sim. Luz, água, telefone, internet, né, jardinagem, toda a estrutura da Fundação, né, e toda a parte formal também, né, a obrigatoriedade da Fundação tem como prestação de contas perante o Ministério Público, Prefeitura, Estado, Conselho Municipal da Criança e Adolescente, Conselho Municipal da Assistência Social, demanda um trabalho formal de equipe administrativa, e nada disso também é custeado por esses editais, e essas parcerias são receitas que a Fundação busca, né, no seu dia a dia, para que possa dar conta dessas responsabilidades.
Muito obrigada, Vinícius. Thank you very much, Jorge. I'm going to open now for our last remarks, so everybody will get the chance to make their final comments. In case Richard or you has any other questions, I think we can try to make it if we stick to the last minutes that we have. All right, so I'm going to pass the floor to Jorge so he can make his final remarks, final comments, and we're wrapping it up.
Yeah, my final comment has to do the book. As I mean, you asked the questions, I gave the answer. The book is an option to the reality in law, politics, and international relations that, to me, Jorge Emilio Núñez, is not working. Something is failing, and it's been clear for quite a few decades. I mean, people probably paid more attention because of the pandemic. And people became a bit more aware, but the pandemic showed people are very selfish. They care about themselves. Unless you have some people, because I believe in goodness, I don't believe in people badness, I believe in goodness, but because of fear, people act in certain ways. That's my belief. So the book is an option. To me, the main priority is not the book, is the Fundação Angelica Goulart. So thank you very much, Fundação Getulio Vargas, because for us, not only the book, Richard obviously, first of all, for the patience of reading the book, and Julie as well. Fernando and Yasmin, because they are not here, but we've been talking, people see probably a couple of hours. We've been working on this presentation for months, I don't know how long, but we started with Fernando and Yasmin probably 6 months ago dealing with it, because I've been to Colombia, Peru, and now here, and then Argentina. And obrigado Vinicius as well for being here. Welcome back to Fundação Getulio Vargas, because he's an ex-student from here, and I'm very proud of you, of the team as well. Brazil, please don't wait for someone coming from the UK to help Fundação Angelica Goulart, because they need people to help. It's not about Jorge Núñez, it's not about Xuxa Meneghel, and I'm not nobody compared to Xuxa, but it's about people helping people. Thank you, obrigado.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Richard. If there's anything else you would like to add? No? All right. Vinícius, alguma coisa mais que você queira adicionar? Tá ótimo, muito obrigada. Muito obrigada pela sua presença, pelo seu esforço de estar aqui contribuindo com uma visão diferente. And thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for people at home and people over. I guess this is it. I forgot to introduce myself, I think, in the beginning. A little detail. I'm Julia Tomás. I am a research assistant to the Technology and Society. I'm sorry, I thought the mic was off. As well as for the program for the diversity and inclusion. It was a pleasure to moderate that debate, and thank you very much.
Obrigado.
Why do you not believe in it? So that's the flip side. I think about a lot.
Oi? Claro! Quer ficar com os outros?